My name is Laird Klingler. I'm a librarian with the Cornish Historical Society, and we're here to interview Martha Sorhide and Jim Fitch. And appropriately enough, we're at the home where they both grew up. The date is September 14th, 2017, and Billy Scharf will be doing the filming. May we start, please, by just asking where and when you were born?
I was born October 19th, 1952 at Hanover Hospital.
And I was born November 24th, Thanksgiving morning, 1949, in Claremont Hospital.
Claremont. Okay. And to give us a location here, Martha, could you start first and just tell us a little bit about this house?
Okay. Well, it was built in 1798 and by Jabez Spicer. He had built it for his sister. And when the rafters went up, we have a letter that tells about the person that owned it. Their granddaughter wrote and said that when it was built, all the men in town came to help put up the rafters. It was a whole town. I don't know how many people in town lived there then, but all the men came to put it up. So it was made 1798. And my parents bought it, and we're thinking about right after they were married. They were married in 1945. So, and the way they got the house was that Martha Quimby, who lived here by herself at that point, her husband had died and her son lived out in Chicago. Wasn't it Chicago? I think so. Anyway, so she wanted to keep it farm, and my father was a farmer, and they were looking for a place to live, so she offered to sell them the farm, this house, in 100 acres for $3,000.
$3,000?
Yeah, and that was the same price that her parents had bought it for,
Really?
2 generations before. So, they moved down here, and my father continued to farm up in the family farm, which is a mile up the road where Jim lives now, until 1952, and then he brought the cows down here. And he, actually, keep going on this, he fixed up the stables for the barn for the cows, and at that time he had to borrow some money, and actually they had to borrow money to buy the place, and it took him decades to pay it back. But he had to borrow more money to make the stables, and to do that he need more collateral. So his parents gave him that farm too, and that's why he got both farms, and he paid the taxes for that farm, and also provided his parents with a little money every month, whether he had it or not, the rest of their lives. So anyway, so this is that.
So I wanted to add a little bit. The house was paid for $3,000, but part of the deal was that Martha Quimby could live here as long as she lived.
Right.
So the house came with this old lady, and I think she lived 5 years or 7
I think
years
so.
after that.
Something like that. Then she went to a nursing home.
And
or
that
with
sounds
her
a little
son.
unusual, except the Fitches and Quimbys were pretty close. Well, it's really not a half a mile. I call it 10-minute walk to the cookie jar when we lived here to get to my grandparents. And they always kept, you could see then, there weren't any trees in the way, and they always kept track of each other's lights. And somebody got up at night and saw a kerosene lantern going, they'd ask them the next day why they were up in the middle of the night. And they actually put a telephone in. Before telephones were popular, they had a phone just between these two houses. And the mail was delivered here, so somebody'd walk down here, and somehow they'd get hold of each other. The mail was here, and somebody'd walk down here to get it. And some of the time, they were also delivering milk to Windsor. Somebody had to go to Windsor every day. So they took turns, one to go one day and one the next. And I suppose my family would come here and pick their milk up and take it to Windsor. And when the Quimbys, I don't know how that worked, but they went up there and got the milk or not. But so that every day, they didn't have any way to cool milk really, so it had to get into a cooler. And so every day somebody had to go to Windsor with milk. And these two families worked together on that, and they also worked together farming. And
You still have a Quimby next to you, don't you?
yeah,
From in the garden.
yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, Peggy is the great-granddaughter of Martha Quimby.
Yes, yeah, the link there. You still have that link.
Yes,
Yes.
yes, yep.
Well, I'd like to ask, tell us about growing up on the Dingleton Hill. Jim, you want to say anything?
It was mostly about work. We had the farm going, and in those days it was mostly manual labor. We didn't have any bucket loader to move manure or hay, so it was all done by hand. We had 21 milking cows, and then usually 8 or 10 heifers growing up. It was pretty primitive operation. So the manure had to get shoveled up every day with a shovel and a wheelbarrow and dumped. And because cows had to be fed and milked twice a day. And we had a silo, had to throw, climbed all the way up silo and throw this corn down by hand. And it was also pretty active place. My family, my mom and dad took in state children to help pay for, because they would get foster kids, I suppose.
And also, my mother had worked in the welfare office, so she saw the need that the children needed a good home.
So there were often people that would come, some stayed a few weeks and some stayed for
Their whole lives.
Yeah,
Yep.
until they were 18
Yeah, there
or
were
something.
7. Yeah, it was 7 in all. And we had two girls. Velma Lord was one, and another woman named Sylvia, who lived with my whole growing up. They were here. And so there were 7 in all, but like
Yeah.
Jim said, some that just stayed a few years at the
You
beginning.
ended up having a big family then.
It was a lot of people around
And
here.
also,
yeah.
this was an apartment they rented, and often there were kids with that there too.
They
and-
advertised in Boston, down Boston papers, and people would come up and spend a week vacation up on the farm.
They did
They
that
had
for a
three
while.
cows, yeah, and then they rented.
And then they would get other people, relatives or people they know to come in for the summer to help hay. So we had quite a crowd here some of the time.
Martha,
Yeah.
some of your childhood memories.
Yeah, well, it was very secluded. This is where we were most of the summer. We would go to Windsor to go to swimming lessons, but we didn't spend much time there. We'd go to Claremont to get our school shopping before school started, but we never went to West Lebanon. I don't ever remember going there. We went to visit my mother's parents in Pittsfield, New Hampshire, which was an hour and a half trip then at least. It was before the interstate, and we did probably once a month we would go there. So we did get away there, but most of the time it was just here. The highlight of the summer was the Cornish Fair. I mean, I wouldn't be able to sleep. I'd be so excited. And friends would come over, and it was a 2-day fair. My parents were busy with the church and the Grange there, so we would just, run around all day long and save our money when cutting green beans and watching cows for 50 cents an hour or 5 cents a bag or whatever. And one year I made $7. I was so enthusiastic to have that much money for the Cornish Fair. So that was the big deal. And also after haying, we'd go to the White Mountains for the day. Father would have someone come and milk the cows in the evening. So as soon as he got them done in the morning, we'd go with all the guys that Jim was talking about that would help us hay, the cousins and sons of family members that would help us hay. And we'd all, we had a big cart because we drove the school bus. My parents drove the school bus on the hill both ways. So we'd pile everybody in and go up to the White Mountains for the day.
Yeah,
And that was a
Suburban,
big deal.
Chevy Suburbans they had.
Really?
They were.
Where did you go to school in Cornish here then?
I was the second class to start the new school. I was in the second, so I started in the first grade. I was the second first grade to start in Cornish. So
Did you go then first to one of the one-room schools?
No. I was the first.
Oh, you started.
I
I'm
started.
sorry.
Yeah,
I
I
see.
started. I was the second. My Velma was the first. She was the first grade, the first year, and then the next year I started.
And you would have gone to the
Yeah.
central school all the time.
Yeah,
Yeah,
had
he was
2 years
3
later.
years.
Yeah, with 3 years apart. Yeah.
Yeah,
What about high school? Where did you go to high school?
Windsor. Windsor. It was
Windsor,
back
yeah.
then. It was on this side of town. You had to go to Windsor. On the other side of town, went to Claremont. So I had to go to Windsor, and there was no other girls. There was only boys there. And back then, the boys and girls didn't play together like they do nowadays. So it was like moving to a different town for me. It was different for Jim, I think, but for me, it was like, it was really, the big city, and we often had to walk most of the way. And we didn't have to walk on 12A. Sometimes we'd have to walk down to 12A, and then we'd get a ride on the bus to the bridge and then walk over.
We always like to ask people who have memories of Windsor from the past, compare Windsor past and present. Jim? What do you remember
Oh,
about
Windsor, I was busy. It was a busy town when the shops were all going. Cone and Goodyear. And if you were over there at noontime, when there's a whistle that blew every noontime, and we would hear it here go, so we knew what time it was. And the streets would just fill right full of people.
I've heard people, you couldn't
and-
walk down the street without running into somebody. It was just so crowded,
And we-
especially a Friday night or something. too.
Yeah.
Going
We'd do shopping over there, and it'd be hard to find a parking place.
That was your town. Really?
Yeah,
It
Windsor.
was, but
Yeah.
we didn't spend a lot. I mean,
We didn't go there that
not
much.
No. there was a movie theater, and I think we did. I remember. Do you remember?
Yeah,
going
I
to
went there
movie
once,
theater?
maybe when I was really
Not a
young.
lot because we
Yeah.
didn't, do that sort of thing very often.
When I interview people that have know Windsor from the past, they always talk about the movie theater. There were two movie theaters. That they say. You always I like to ask too. Do you remember any of the movies that you saw?
Not here. No, I remember Pittsfield, the Martin Park Kettle, but no, I don't remember the
I
movie
want to
here.
say Swiss Family Robinson, but I don't know if
Really?
that date lines up.
Is that right?
I remember being so young, I was scared, and I couldn't sit through the whole thing. I laughed because I was so scared to be
What were you
watching
scared
it.
of?
I don't remember that, but
I mean, in the movie theater. Huh?
Most
Yeah.
movies
Is
are
that-
scary. Yeah.
and I think it was the Windsor Movie Theater. I can't
Oh, is that right?
Sure, I'd have to look to see when that came out. But
Yeah. Also, our mother was a tax collector for 30 years. And when she first got the job, she decided that the tax collector was being paid too much. And we lived on practically, we had very little money growing up. But she decided that it was the person before her was getting too much money or something, and she went to the town and had them vote on reducing her salary. And she was
Really?
she would go to, there's some people in town who couldn't afford to pay their taxes, and she would go there once a month and sit down with them and collect their $10 or whatever they
Or
could
once
pay
a
for
week.
that month.
So-
Or once
some
a
of
week,
them-
was it?
some
Once
of
a
them she'd
week?
go once a week. She'd go every time to get $2.
Yeah.
Just so they were contributing and trying to get it paid up. And
Yeah, because they
And-
couldn't take their house away if they were paying something.
I think the
so.
selectmen knew that if they paid $2 a week, they were trying as hard as they could. That's all they had, and they probably abated some of that. But
You mentioned the church before. The Fitch family has been long involved in what was a congregational church, now the United Church of Cornish. Were church activities important to you as you were growing up?
Big part.
our
Yeah,
mother was very religious.
yeah.
And
We were
she
all,
dragged us off Sunday mornings, and we had devotions, and we had Bible study, and we had it was-
Bible school, and in
Bible
the summer we'd
school.
have a week going to Bible school. And
Yeah.
that was a big.
We went to the
Big deal.
Center Church in the winter, and then out to Cornish Flat in the summer. At least part of our
Oh,
time
was that right?
growing up.
Yeah, we could name all the books in the Bible, and we knew it all at one point. Yeah, and the Grange too was a big part. My father was
yes.
very active in the Grange. He would go down and milking the cows. He would be memorizing his speeches he had to make, and he took it very seriously. I don't think he was he ever a master?
Probably.
I don't know, but he probably had
never.
every other position.
Yeah.
It was very important to him because back when he was growing up, that was the social, that's what they did. And, and
Yeah.
it lasted.
He would
most
travel
of
to
his life.
Claremont and Leominster and Lebanon and to go to different Grange meetings,
Yeah.
which was a big deal in those days.
And we couldn't wait to get 15 so we could ride the goat, because that's what you do when you join the Grange. You have to ride the goat. It was kind of.
I don't think I don't understand. Tell us a little bit more about that. I don't understand.
Well, there was never really a goat. There's a little thing. Is it still there? On the floor of the Grange upstairs? There used to be a door, and I don't
Little
know if
trap
it's still
door
the
there,
trap
yeah.
door, and they'd say that's
Yes.
where the goat was. And if you joined the Grange, they'd take the goat out, and you'd have to ride it. Well, I joined the Grange. I never did see a goat.
Yeah, I forgot what that was about, but they talked about riding a goat.
Yeah,
For an initiation.
Yeah.
yeah.
All right, interesting.
Yeah.
I remember one time, Jim, you remember that when they had an entertainment? I guess this must have been after we both joined. And we went up and played the guitar and
Did you?
sang.
Yeah.
A clown, something about a clown.
Well, this has been now at our town office now.
Yeah.
On the second floor where the stage is.
Yeah.
So you remember presentations?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Going.
Yes, yeah, it was very important. All the kids in the family became members.
Of the Grange.
Some of them, Jim went longer than I did.
Yeah,
I don't
I had
think
a
I went
couple
to
of-
more than a few
I was
meetings. but-
gatekeeper and maybe a steward or something. I was a couple things.
Really?
I went for 3 or 4 years maybe.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your families. Tell us how you met your spouses, and tell us about your families now. Martha?
Okay, I met Dean at a bluegrass festival in Castleton, Vermont. I was living in Minnesota, and I came back from we have younger brother, Bud's, his graduation from high school. I came back for that, and there's this bluegrass festival going on, so when my girlfriends didn't want to go, so I convinced Jim to go with me, and we went to it, and that's where I met Dean, and then we corresponded afterwards, and I moved back here. And that was 42 years ago. So, yeah, he had been building a house down in Antrim for his parents.
And your children?
And yeah, I have 2 children. Yeah, they 2 children and 6 grandchildren now. Just got a new one last week. Born in the car on the way to the hospital. 30 minutes from the hospital. He was born on the side of the interstate. So, yeah, and then we lived in Antrim with no electricity and were running water for about 3 years, and we loved it. And then the apartment opened up. The people moved out, and so my parents asked if we wanted to move up, and we thought, well, we'll move up here and save some money for our own place. We'll be here like 5 years. And the 5 years came up, and I said to Mom, we're only going to be here 5 years, and she said no. She says we'll never rent it again. We'd rather have you stay. So we did, and then in 1988, my mother passed away from cancer, and then a few years later, we switched houses with my father, and we fixed up the apartment some for him, and then he died in 2006.
Now, I know of your son's very active in the Upper Valley.
Yeah.
Just say a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, he's director of Will and Hands, which collects food from restaurants.
And his name is?
Gabriel Zorhide, and he's married to Haley. They have 4 children. Yes, he's always been into nonprofit. He's really been important to him to work for a nonprofit organization. He was really important and interested in vital communities for a long time. And then he was a farmer. He grew his own beef and pigs and chickens, which was pretty good for a boy who grew up being a vegetarian. And he's kind of fading away from that a little bit now, but he is, and his wife is a school teacher. She worked a year, and now she's got a baby, so she's taken a year off.
Oh, good.
And my daughter is a guy. She lives in Sharon, and married a guy named Reuben, who's a cabinet maker, and they have 2 children. And she works as a guidance counselor in Sharon Elementary School.
Jim?
My wife is Susan Fitch. She was born in Nebraska and lived in Arizona and California, several places around. And she got a job with the Conservation Commission through a CETA program, as a government program I guess employment was way down, so they hired a whole bunch of people to help different nonprofits. They didn't call them nonprofits in those days, but so she got a job in Cornish mapping all the old roads and wells, and those records are still in the town office. So I was working for the highway department and pretty much knew all the new girls that came in town. And because she was working for the town and she was, around a lot, and so I'd invite her to ride in the bucket loader or on the grader or something. And in those days things were a little looser, you could do whatever you wanted. And so Cornish Fair came along, so we got to spend some time there. And then I took her on the first date, was to the animal auction up in East Thetford. They sold cows and horses, and that was the first date we were on that I took her to. And then she took me to a contra dance a week or 2 later. And so that's kind of how we got started. And then we continued. I mean, we were only together for a year before we got married, but we had a lot of fun just doing the back roads with the town equipment. The grader had a bench seat. It was wide enough for 2 people. So she would just ride around the roads plowing, and we would get invited into people's houses. Both one Thanksgiving, the Thibodeaux, we were up there plowing. They said, come on in. So we went in, sat down, had Thanksgiving dinner with them, and spent a couple hours.
Where was it? Where
Thibodeau Road off Jackson Road.
Oh, okay.
And also Bow and Polly Rock. We were going by there. And they came out, waved us in, and when it just about mealtime, I guess, we'd sit down and ate with them. Left the grader running in the middle of the road because we knew nobody was coming. And so there were several places that were common stops.
Yeah.
And, so we got married, and she's a school teacher by education. So she taught school for a couple of years. And we have 3 children. Our oldest son lives in New York. He's an electrical engineer. Our daughter lives in Seattle, and he has 2 children. Our daughter, Cassie, is in Seattle, and she's a geologist. She worked for mining companies till the kids came along, and now she's a stay-home mom. And our youngest son lives up on the farm with us, with his wife and a baby, Corey.
Corey was very involved in the 250th booklet, wasn't
Yeah,
he?
he was. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, he's involved in town. He's on the they're both on the Conservation Commission.
Good.
Yeah, they're involved in a lot of stuff going on.
They're also good dancers, aren't they?
They are very good dancers. And let me
recall
tell you
that.
that story because it's a good one. He was, we were at Gabriel's wedding, and there were dancing going on. And Corey came up to his mother, says, "Mom, teach me a couple steps. I want to dance with her." There was some girl he was interested in. So Sue told Corey afterwards, says, "You know, if you want to impress the girls, you don't have to learn much dancing, because there aren't many guys that know dancing." And so he did. He went to somewhere in the Upper Valley and took some swing dance lessons. And so he kind of enjoyed it. Mostly, you know, there were older people then and all that. And then he went to school in Savannah, Georgia, to the art school, Savannah School of Art and Design. And he was getting settled, didn't know anybody, and there was a swing club. So he thought he'd go see what that was about. And his wife, Deanna, was president of the swing club. So that's how they met each other, and they really find, yeah, they're good dancers.
Good, good. Let's talk now about your careers. Martha, tell us about your careers. You went out west.
To college?
Was that what college, or was that work then?
Well, I did go out to Iowa. I went to college in Iowa for a couple of years.
Where was that?
And William Penn College in Oskaloosa, Iowa.
Iowa, yeah.
I just wanted to get away from Cornish, and I didn't feel this was, you know, I need to have some adventures, and Iowa seemed like far enough away it should be an adventure. Well, it was probably the wrong place for me, but I lasted a couple of years, and then I came back in the Upper Valley and worked for a while, and then until I met Dean, actually, I just worked.
What did you do?
Oh, waitressing, nurse's aide, anything. Worked for Curran Hatton for a while, you know, just kind of any jobs I could find. And then after I got married and the children were growing up, then I decided, when I was like at 40, I decided I better get some more education. And so I went to nursing school. So I became an LPN. And I worked as an LPN for 20 years. And right after I finished LPN, I worked as a nurse's aide, so I knew I didn't want to work full-time as an RN or an LPN. So I kind of had my eyes open, and I saw a massage school. I went to an open house and decided I really wanted to do that too. So I worked as a massage therapist and a nurse at the site for about 20 years. Sometimes per diem nursing and sometimes part-time, and I never worked full-time. And then my nursing home that I worked at Montescutney Hospital closed down when I planned to work there till I retired, but it closed down and I didn't want to start again anywhere else. So I kind of my body was getting kind of tired of doing massages. So I got the job as Director of Volunteers in Action, which has been wonderful. I've been there for about 3.5 years. And that's where I am now. I work there part-time.
I'm on the board, and I know you do a wonderful job.
Oh, thank you.
But tell us a little bit about Volunteers in Action. I mean, you know.
Okay, well, it's just this started 20 years ago, in last January, and just from a guy in town who saw that Windsor had a major problem. There's a lot of people needed rides for medical appointments and shopping, and there was nobody to give them rides. He had worked for RSVP, Retired Senior Volunteer Program, and you know he couldn't handle it all. So he got a group of people together to organize this group, which they called the Volunteers in Action, and they got a $50,000 grant from the Robert Wood Foundation to get it started. And it was under the RSVP for the first till 2001, and then it became under Montescutney Hospital, which was a good move. So, and now we branched into doing Meals on Wheels and community meals and just about everything anybody needs. You know, whether there's ants in their kitchen or, you know, the homeless, people who have no food. You know, people call us for all kinds of things. We also have knitting groups. We take classes on matter of balance classes. And we have, like, you know, you're so active in Cornish of the aged in place groups. And there's 7 towns that we serve, and each one now has an aged in place group to, you know, just to help people make sure no one falls through the cracks, make sure people who need in their town get what they need, and also make their towns better so they can age in place themselves.
A very valuable organization.
Yeah.
Yes, and you do wonderful work.
Yes, well, thank you. It is a great organization.
Jim, before I ask you about your career, I recall one time you said that you would like to be a full-time farmer, but the economics of that on a smaller scale today would make that very difficult. You know, your ancestors were farmers. That's what they did.
You know, the difference is that money didn't matter. You know, before our folks, they didn't have any money. Money wasn't really part of their lives. They grew all their own food, and they had taxes to pay, but they'd sell a cow to pay the taxes. And, you know, money wasn't a big deal.
And that's why they got through. The Depression didn't affect them at all. Because
Yeah,
the money
my dad
didn't
said
matter.
that Depression didn't matter. They didn't have any money anyway.
I've heard that from other people. Yeah.
And so, the type of farming that we were doing growing up was kind of with that kind of in mind. There wasn't much really thinking about the business part of it. So that in those days, especially, it's better now than it was. A small farm really struggled hard. It was just a whole bunch of work. So I think that there's a lot of small farms that are a lot more successful now than they were 20 years ago. You have really business people, college educated people that decided they'd rather just stay home and grow vegetables, but they have the business background and they know how to do that. So for me, I didn't really know how to do all that part of it. That's the biggest part. Anybody can grow, or most people can grow vegetables or cows or whatever, but turning that into money is a whole different program. I think, Gabe Zorhard, Gabe and Haley, they tried it. They had a whole bunch of cows and did a lot of pigs and chickens, and they did it for 5 or 8 years maybe.
Something like that. Yeah.
And they're both well educated, and they've just decided that it wasn't working. There was just so much outgo and so busy. You can only work 12, 15 hours a day, and then there's just not time enough to get all that done. And I think as the kids came along, they tried to incorporate the kids, but it's hard to do that.
Well, you do many different things, and one thing that you do sleigh rides.
Yep.
With your big Belgians.
Long about, it's probably been 10, 12 years ago, as our kids kind of grew up and they didn't need us. They needed us mostly to get out of the way. I needed another hobby. So I decided to get a horse. And I'm not really a horse guy, but I didn't know, I've always been interested in horses, and I said it'd be fun to get a horse. So we got a horse named Mac. He came from Indiana, an Amish farm in Indiana. And we had him for a year or so, just kind of, we used him around the farm a little bit, cultivating and that sort of thing. And then we decided it'd be nice to have a team. So we got another horse. Both of them were given to us, old horses. And so then we started kind of taking rides on back roads with people, and it wasn't anything official because we had 2 horses and a wagon, so people would go for a ride. And it's kind of fun doing that. And so we kind of did more with them, did a little logging, a little haying, and kind of playing around. And then when those horses had a problem, we had to put them down. And a friend of mine, Bob Simons from Claremont, who I knew his horses, and we'd kind of worked together a little bit. And he came over, and his horses, he had them out every day for 70 years. They're just dead broke, nice animals. And he came over one day, and he said, and I just told Sue, I said, we're going to take a break from horses for a while, because it's kind of, it costs some money and takes a lot of time. And I just told Sue that a few days before he showed up, and he said, if you'll buy the harnesses, you can have the horses. So I'm like, how do I turn this down? If I'm, and I knew the horses were
Are these the
nice
Belgians
boys.
that you have now? Yeah.
And I had him as a mentor, kind of come with him. So I kind of worked up my courage to tell Sue that I want to get another team of horses. And so she had me wait 6 weeks before we got them because she wanted a break. So then we decided we'd try to make money with them somehow. And so we started doing wagon rides and sleigh rides around here. And it's kind of evolved into right now we do the Apple Orchard, Riverview Farm. We do that for 8 weekends. We did 41 sleigh rides from the house last winter. We've got a road through the woods, and I've got better at telling stories and a little history. And
I've taken one.
Yeah.
I would recommend it to everyone.
Oh, good.
But what are the names of the horses? I forgot their names.
right now we have Prince and Rock,
Fix and Rock.
and we actually just picked up another one yesterday. Rock is 18 years old, and Prince is 23. But Rock has a problem with his foot that we've been dealing with for a couple of years, and it kind of acted up some this week. And so I get pretty uncomfortable with not knowing if he can't do a job, and we've committed to, we kind of need a backup horse. So we picked one up yesterday, actually.
Oh, really? Really?
And as I speak, Bill Ladd is a great help to me, big mentor. He's a horse person. So he and Bob right now are trying out my new horse. We hooked him up just for a game down here, and
Now you've done rides over in Windsor along the river, and I was thinking, you know, when you take your team through the Windsor Covered Bridge, it's like going back in time.
yeah,
You
that's
know,
a
you know, that was the way people before
Yeah.
would get into Windsor, when you do that,
Yeah.
you really are stepping back in time.
the
Yeah.
sounds of the horse clipping through that bridge. You just can't repeat that. You know, it's just really nice. And we do Caroline Stores has us do a Cornish tour from the Chase House with, I think this year we had 4th grade. So we got a whole wagon full of kids, and we stop at each one of the mostly Chase houses or different people that live down 12A, and she's had each one of the kids learn something about that person. So we stop and they get up and talk about the person and you know, the history of the house. And then we stop at the cemetery and they find that person stoned because most of them are buried right there. Then we go down across the covered bridge and come back and go down to Blow Me Down up St. Gordon's. We've done that a few years. So that's really a nice thing to
Very
do.
nice, yes.
And we also do Lebanon Halloween and Christmas events, Hanover Christmas event, Claremont for Alumni Parade and a New Year's event. So we do other towns around the area too.
Good. I wanted to ask about volunteer activities. Of course, with Volunteers in Action, you are employed there, but I know you're also active on a volunteer basis with activities here in Cornish. I'm thinking about the fair, for one, but tell us about some of your volunteer activities here.
I worked at the fair for 30, I guess it was close to 40 years. I was working up at the exhibits, and I'm taking a little break this year, and I'll probably get back to it next year at some point in a smaller amount. The garden club, I'm active in the garden club, and that was a big, that was a big deal for my growing up too, the garden club. Once a month my parents would go. I never went. I thought it was kind of an old person's thing, and kind of wished I had now, because once I did join, it's really a great organization, and you learn a lot, and it's a great way to get to know other people in town. And other than that, yeah.
Jim, I know, I remember how active you were with the restoration of the Korea Barn. You actually provided some of the lumber.
Yeah, I did
for
some of that, yeah.
you know. Any other things you might mention? You do a lot in the community.
I did more. I used to do more volunteering than I do now. Right now I'm on 2 committees, and my thing is that I'll be on a committee if I don't have to sit in an office or sit at a meeting that's indoors. So I'm on 2 committees. One's the Town Forest Committee, which all our meetings are outdoors, usually on a hike, or we have 4 meetings a year. One of them is picking up trash up and down the road. And the others trail work and that sort of thing in the town forest. And the other one I'm on the wetlands board, which we really don't have meetings. We just do things dealing with the wetlands. A lot of it has to do with beaver population. So both of those, I don't have to sit at any meetings.
That's key, that you don't have to go to meetings.
Right, I'm done sitting at meetings listening to people.
Many of
fussing
us feel the same way.
Yeah,
So.
well, I'm old enough, so I don't have to do that.
Good for you. Good for you.
That's one reason we're outdoors today, because I didn't want to sit inside a building.
Okay. We were hoping to go down to the Platt Cemetery.
Yeah.
But there were some forecasts of rain, so it's very lovely to be here, and it fits, being here with your home. When we do these interviews, especially for people that have been here for some time, we'd like to ask about Cornish, past, and present. And the 2 issues that have come up would be roads, the change in the roads, and the decline in the school population. So let's start first with the roads. What do you remember about Cornish roads in the past as compared to the way they are now?
Well, it's a lot busier up here. When we were growing up, if a car went by, my father would look out, and we didn't know who it was. We'd have to find out who it was and what they were doing up here. Now it just with all in the summertime, it's just really busy back and forth. But you probably have more to
But
say
what
about
about
that.
for example, do you remember like mud issues? And some people think the snow removal was much slower, for example.
In the wintertime, my father, had the tractor, and he was always pulling. Probably once a week or 2, he was pulling somebody out of the ditch, and we don't have anybody lately.
You also have to keep in mind, we were
Getting
growing
stuck.
up, there were very few 4-wheel drive vehicles.
Yeah,
So that people were trying to get around in cars, two-wheel drive, and always kept a set of tire chains in the car. And if you're coming up Dingleton, we'd back in the covered bridge and put tire chains on before you left.
Yeah, parents never had four-wheel drive. They only had one car.
So that's part of the difference. And yeah, the equipment's all so much bigger and faster now that they keep the roads open. I've been an advocate for keeping country roads. You know, I've been protested a lot of road widening and changes. One of them, when I was on the road department, there were several of the roads, including this one, had a V in the middle. You go up this way and that way, and there was a piece of ground in the middle that you drove around. And there, I bet there were at least 20 in town.
Like at the Gap
And,
Road.
Yeah, on the end of Gap Road is one. There's a telephone pole in the middle of it, and I bet that's the only reason that one's still there. There was one on Mill Village. They just got rid of a few years ago. It was kind of made it a more of a country setting instead of coming to a corner and people that, the guys plowing the snow, a lot of them didn't like it. I like the challenge, figure out how to do it. You do it a little different each time, and pretty soon you figure it out. It's not that bad. So that's one thing I fought every one of those, losing those little islands, but that totally changed the landscape of the road when they did that, as far as I'm concerned. One thing so far we have been successful is keeping Witten Cemetery Road a country road. There's no power line on Witten Cemetery Road, and it can be closed. It used to always be closed in the spring. They didn't use it during mud season, and people would have to go around. And so we were able to have a lot of meetings talking about not widening that road. For some reason, everybody wants to go faster with the plow. The highway crew wants to go faster and not deal with stone walls and trees. But I suggest they go work for the interstate. They can go really fast on the interstate. So that's one thing that's changed. Also, the roads were more of a community thing. The highway department, you knew everybody on the highway department, and they would stop and have a cup of coffee, or they would just kind of be the news. They'd stop and tell you what's going on in town, and just that's all changed. Now they can't stop for coffee. First they got radios, so everybody knows where they are. When I was doing it, there weren't any radios, and you could be lost for 2 hours and nobody would even miss you, really, because you could stop and talk to anybody. Or we had several people that late at night would get waved in. We'd have to go in and have a drink with them, and they were type of thing. In fact, Mr. Sutter was a good Scotch drinker, and he always had some fine Scotch. And I plowed his road a lot, and it was especially on the end of the road. We could stop there, and nobody's going to know we're there. So even pretty late at night, he would come out and wave me in there, and I'd sit in and have a couple glasses of Scotch and hear some stories. And
Jim is mentioning Mr. Sutter because the Sutters own the home where I live now, at the top of the hill on Old Stagecoach Road. And I remember the story. Virginia Coley would tell me that when Harold Morse would come down to plow her driveway, she would always come out with muffins.
Sure.
For Harold. It was that type of thing.
Yeah, especially around Christmas time. We'd get gloves and food, and it was, the roads were a community, and everybody, we always stopped. A lot of them were narrow enough, so you kind of had to stop and let somebody else go by, which if you're going that slow, you stop and talk to somebody, even if it's just for a minute, which to me had a lot of value. You could really look somebody in the eye, and now you can meet and you wave when you go by, but you're not really communicating with them.
No. Well, the other issue has been the serious decline in the school enrollment. I don't know if you remember the numbers, but when you went there was probably over 200.
33 in my class, I think.
33. Well, Martha, why do you think that the enrollment has declined?
Just young people are moving away. There's not enough to keep them here. Young people with children. That's the main reason. It's more expensive to live here, and there's not so much work to keep them here, and they don't want to live here.
Jim?
I think that people are having less children, and I don't think it's just
less children too. Yeah, we
I don't think it's moving. I talked to somebody from the Midwest, and I forgot. just recently, probably last week, and I asked him about his school population. And they're doing the same thing we are. Less and less kids, schools are consolidating, and maybe people are moving to the cities more. This was probably in the country somewhere. But I think it's just less children. You know, if you have more than 2 kids now, it's pretty unusual. And
Yeah, it was unusual then to have less than 3 kids. I mean, we had a
Yeah.
lot of large families. I
Yeah.
also think I want to mention that we didn't have any doctors or lawyers. Everybody in my class either worked at Cones, Goodyear's, or were farmers. There was no doctors or lawyers, or I mean, nobody had money, you know, when growing up, which, you know, it didn't really matter, which is really different. That's a really big difference. But it was also large families. And,
I think few people that did have money sent their kids off to boarding school or
right,
private schools or something.
right. Yeah.
Now, one issue that has come up when we talk to people is that people have questioned whether the land use policies in Cornish are in conflict with the ability to enroll more students. In other words, we have 5-acre zoning. You know, if we had areas where it was less than 5 acres, still preserving open space, we might encourage people with with lower income to move in here.
So are you thinking more houses?
Yes. Yeah, now, you know, of course, I'm not advocating. I'm saying what people have said. You know, many people do feel this way.
Yeah.
That we want to preserve open space, but there could be areas, for example, 1-acre zoning, that people with, you know, not wealthy people could afford. You know, affording a home, you know, in Cornish is an expense. Do you have any views on our land policies here in relation to the school?
I don't think the 10-acre thing is fair for
5.
everybody.
5.
5 acre, well, 10 acres for the current use, right?
5-acre zone. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yes.
I don't think that's quite fair because somebody has 9.5 acres, they're paying a lot of money. So there's a problem there. But on the other side, the land doesn't ask for anything. It's not the land. If nobody lived here, there would be no taxes. And if only a few people lived here, they would make decisions on what they wanted for services. So I think the whole concept of taxing land is something that came from England when we moved over here 250 years ago. So I think the current use really helps that the people are paying taxes, not, you know, the value of the land shouldn't be what decides what the taxes are for people. And for people like us, if we didn't have the current use, we wouldn't be here. You know, we wouldn't be able to pay the taxes. So I think it has a lot of value. Like I say, it could be adjusted. It's not fair for somebody that has 9 acres as they pay more than their share. But I do think it's important to keep in mind that the land does not ask for services. It's the people that ask for service. And a friend of mine, Herbert Ogden, had a cider mill in Heartland, and he was a state rep in Vermont, and he was all about sales tax, that it should be more of a sales tax. If the people have money, if they can afford a car, they can afford an extra few bucks for whatever to pay for the car. And it also encouraged people to save money. Right now, there's no incentive to encourage people to save money. And so, because they have to pay income taxes, they have all this stuff when they get their money, they have to pay on it. And if it was a sales tax, they wouldn't have to pay on money that they're saving. So, yeah, I'd like to see the tax structure change. I don't know what to change it to, and I think it's going to be hard because people are making a lot of money off it the way it is. And it's a little scary to change anything because you really don't know how it's going to come out.
Martha, anything else?
Yeah, I agree with what Jim says. I just think it would be really, I think, I can understand why people get upset with current use. I mean, I can understand that. But I don't think that they see the whole picture. Because if we didn't have current use, like we say, we wouldn't be here. And it would be divided up into 5, 10-acre lots. And we'd have so many people living in town. Nobody, you know, it wouldn't be good for anybody. So I think,
Yeah, again, I'm not advocating, but people feel that we can preserve open space and yet also, for example, have areas where the zoning requirements were less.
Right, have villages.
To
That's what we
encourage,
talked about.
you know,
Like Cornish,
that's
Yeah.
come up a lot, you know, in the interviews.
I like to think about in New York City, there's not, you know, there's some open space, but people are crowded together and there's a lot of people there. But I don't want to pay any taxes in New York City. So I mean, that's just an extreme. I don't think our taxes are going to get lower by having more houses in town.
would be people needing more, yeah. There's more people that want more.
But it might
things.
encourage people with lower incomes to move in. You know,
Yeah,
like
which
young
is-
young families, for example.
Yeah,
you know.
which I don't know why I mean, you're indicating you want more kids in the school than we have now.
Well, I think that people are concerned about the decline of enrollment there, and whether there is a future for a Cornish school if the enrollment continues to decline.
Yeah.
You know, and people feel they want to have a Cornish school. You know, some people feel it's come up also. Some people feel that we should merge with Plainfield. You know,
Yeah, I know that's all been talked
you know
about.
these are issues that we.
Yeah.
I just think, I mean, when I hear about kids that have 8 or 10 kids in the class, I say, boy, wouldn't that be nice? We had 32, 35 kids, and most of us just got ignored.
Yeah.
You know,
Okay.
it was pretty bad.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I think I've finished the questions that I wanted to ask, but I would like you to give you the opportunity to talk a little bit about the Fitch family history.
Yeah.
You know, whatever you would like to.
Yeah, I would
add.
like to say so. I think people would like to know how the Fitches came to Cornish,
Sure.
and yeah, they all came. Well, we started. We came over on the Mayflower. William Brewster of the Mayflower, and he was one of the oldest and most religious men on the Mayflower. And his great granddaughter Mary married a James Fitch, and that James Fitch grandfather came over and lived in Connecticut and started Norwich, Connecticut, and also another town in Connecticut too. But anyway, and so Mary and this James, their grandson, married James and Sarah, came up and built a log house up where Jim lives now, and they had 5 children.
And that was about
4
17,
children.
71 is what the deed said.
71? Okay, 71.
We have a deed 1771. I'm assuming they were here before the deed, but we don't know
Right.
that.
And they had 5, go ahead, I want you to
No.
interrupt me. So they had 5 children, and the oldest one, Hezekiah, when he was early 20s, he built the house that Jim lives in, the main house. And he had 7 children or so, but he didn't like it up here for some reason, we'll never know, and he moved to Claremont and bought a big farm down there where it was
And
flatter
what
and
was the
less
date of the
rocks.
house when he built it here?
1790s, late
1790s.
Yeah.
It was a little older than this one. And he sold it to his youngest brother, who was 10 years younger, Samuel. So Samuel and his wife, Thankful, lived there. They always lived with the parents. The parents always stayed there, and the children would, bring up their children. So there's always 3 generations that lived in the farm. And then Samuel and Thankful had a son, James, and married Bethina Bartlett, who was related to the Bartletts down on Dingleton Hill. And then James Bethina, and then they had Chester and Amy Westgate, on Westgate Road in Plainfield, and she was also a second cousin to the Westgates that lived in this house. And they had 4 children, but 3 of them died. So there's only one, if that one child, they didn't have that one child, it would have ended there, but it didn't. They had, they had Chester and Amy, and then they had Alfred. Alfred married Ida, who lived down at the bottom of Dingleton Hill on Platt Road in that yellow house. And they lived with their mother for a while. And then Chester and Amy had 5 children, and the older one being James, which was our grandfather. So, and then grandfather married the minister in town's daughter, and then they had 7 children, and my father being the oldest. So, and then when I told you how my father owned 2 farms because, land was cheap and nobody wanted to farm back then. Nobody else wanted to, and he was the only farmer. So, and then when we got to be in our 20s, our parents said, well, we don't need to have 2 farms. And they gave the farm up on the hill there to all 3 of us kids. We paid the taxes for about 4, 5, 6 years, something like that. And then when Jim and Sue got married, they wanted to live there. So Buddy and I gave our part of the land to Jim and Sue so they could have it, which worked out fine because I got this farm and Buddy hasn't married yet, and he isn't. He's settled in Concord, Manchester, so that's kind of how we got the farm here. And
Well, your family has been very involved in the community. I've been going through recently 19th century documents, and I see the Fitch name. A selectman, for example, very, very active in the community.
Yeah,
And
Alfred
then-
was a selectman.
And then you, and then at the church, you're very involved with the church here in town.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah,
Jim,
like-
I'm sorry. Would you like to add something to Martha?
Well,
you
I was
finished,
just
Martha.
gonna, well, I was just
I'm
going to
sorry.
say something about the grandfather. How he,
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
he was very frail. So his father Alfred died when grandfather was 18. So, and my grandfather was a very wiry, small guy. He wasn't the farmer type, but it was his job to stay home. So he and his mother ran the farm and put his 4 brothers and sisters to college. They all went to college, where James stayed on the farm. And I'm sure he would have liked to have gone to college himself. He was a real reader. He loved to read, and but he stayed on. And then when he was in his 30s, he wanted to get life insurance, and they told him he wasn't strong enough. He wasn't well enough to get life insurance, and he lived to be 102.
We outlived all insurance agents.
Yeah,
The guys that told them no.
yeah, he did.
Yeah, oh, good.
So,
Jim, anything would you like to
Yeah,
add?
there's a few. When she was talking, I was thinking some stuff I could add to. When my grandfather James was at KUA going to high school, and his father died. He was 44 and died of cancer. That was Alfred, who was the selectman. He came home to run the farm, and they were really struggling. He was the oldest one at 18, and his mother was there, and they just weren't making it. And so they actually rented the farm out for a couple of years and moved to Windsor. So he actually didn't live on the farm his whole life. He spent, I think, just a couple of years. He worked at Cohen Automatic Machine Company, which must have been different for him because he had never had anybody tell him what to do,
yeah, and he got sick, I think.
Did he?
There. Yeah, I think I read he got sick, and they said,
So
we
that was-
got to go back on the farm.
That was close to losing the farm. No, they could have easily sold it to somebody in those days.
It's very hard.
And let's see, Orville Brewster Williams, who lived down where Martha's saying the Yellow House on Platte Road with Jillian, what's her name?
Yeah.
The head of the Flower Club. Anyway,
Jillian.
yeah, Jillian. Our family, Orville Brewster Williams and his wife.
Jillian and Mike, I should say.
Yeah.
Yes.
Anyway, they lived on that farm, and my grandmother's father got kicked by a horse when he was 54 years old and died. So that's when the mother
And 2
and
daughters. Yeah. And the 2
there were
daughters.
mother and 3 daughters, and one of the daughters married Alfred. And the other 2
Carrie-
daughters moved to
Carrie and
Windsor.
Nettie.
Yeah, Carrie and Nettie moved to Windsor, and they never married. They lived on Pine Street in Windsor.
School teachers.
Yeah. And so that, try to keep this generation straight, but she stayed, Ida's mother stayed on the farm up here a lot, right?
Yeah.
I think she lived with her daughter up here.
No.
No?
No.
That's
she
a
stayed
different
in
one.
Windsor. No, I just
She did? She stayed in Windsor?
with her
Okay.
daughters. Yeah. No, it was James's.
Okay.
Yeah.
I get, trying to keep it straight.
There are a lot of Fitches.
Yeah.
A lot of Fitches. But that was interesting that he, and I work that field now, so it's
Good
kind
deal.
of neat that
Yeah.
I get to use that land that way.
You mentioned
Relative,
about someone working on a farm. There really aren't farm hands now.
No,
The way that in the past when people would be hired and work on a farm.
right.
Yeah, you
That's
could
a
always
source of
find
employment.
somebody to help on the
And that
farm.
changed when the tractor came. When there were horses, they needed a farm hand to help with all that. And when the tractor came, they could mow without a scythe, and things went quicker. And that's when it started really growing up a lot because they didn't get to all the steep side hills. And if you got a hired man, you had some dead time, you'd send him out mowing. And when that ended, things grew up quicker. Well, the other thing I wanted to mention was the Cornish colony, that they've been a real positive influence from the beginning. That our family sold vegetables to them, and
Eggs.
also
Eggs and
eggs, and probably I don't know what else they sold to them. Probably wood, but they also picked them up in the train in Windsor. Picked them up, brought them, go to Windsor and pick up somebody and bring them, because people came up from New York on the train and had to get to Cornish, so. Somebody would take a horse and buggy and drive over there and get them and bring them up, bring them home.
Any particular names that you recall? or,
I think they did.
well, Augusta St. Gordon's.
Yeah,
They take her,
I think they
Grandpa used to pick
transported
her
them.
up
Augusta?
a lot. Yeah, I think Grandpa picked her
Yeah.
up a lot.
And they were friends with Barrett, who had the
glass
glass
house? The glass
house.
house?
Oh yeah.
They had some meals. He invited them up for a meal once in a while.
Yeah, they'd sit on the floor.
And Percy Mackay's, the family that still lives there, are relatives of Percy Mackay's, and they said my dad was really good friends with one of their relatives. So we mingled with the New York people enough that it was meaningful.
You were too young to remember the glass house as it stood, but did you ever go to the site?
Yeah, that was
of
kind
the
of a
glass house?
Sunday afternoon walk for it. There's a big pine tree up there that's still there. That
So you saw the ruins then?
yeah, we saw the ruins.
Yeah, I used to go up at least once a year. So,
Oh, do you?
yeah.
Do you still?
It's all grown. It used to be a big view, and it was really nice up there. Now it's all grown up.
Who owns that land? Do you know?
Connie Quimby, who was a grandson of the Martha Quimby who lived here, he owns that land, and he passed away, so his wife does.
I see.
And she's still alive in Maine, so it's a big question what's going to happen with
There's
it.
100 acres there.
100 acres.
And it's not. It's
No, she's
it's
not
safe.
interested in doing anything with it. So.
Yeah, so it'll be. a
And
big
there's really
question.
not much interest from the family. We're a little concerned because that's most of Witten Road, most of the north side of Witten Road, north or east side, I don't know which is.
Yeah, see, the Quimbys owned all that whole hill and up here, so they gave it to what was left that my parents didn't buy. They gave it to the 3 grandchildren somehow. I think that's the story. I may not have that right, but anyway, I did get to the 3 grandchildren. How they got
Yeah.
it might be more complicated. But
You know, one thing I thought that we didn't, you mentioned the name, but we really didn't talk about your brother, who was quite active in New Hampshire government.
yeah,
He was a
very
smart
proud-
one amongst us.
He was. He got all the brains. He is. Yeah, we're real proud of him. Yeah,
Well,
he's
tell
a
us
lawyer.
about that.
He's a lawyer. He went to lawyer. Became a lawyer in his 40s. I mean, he's worked for the
Yeah.
Attorney General for many years, and then he worked in different capacities.
He
Then he worked
all
as
the time
senator.
growing up, he was going to be a Marine. And as a little kid, we got pictures of him with his gun and his, camo clothes from the time he was old enough to know what that was all about. And when he was young, he also had ear problems, so did some ear operations. So he got ready to be in the Marine Corps, and it was a big deal in his life. And he got ready, and he was going to boot camp. And he got down to Paris Island, and they did another test on everybody, and they found this hole in his eardrum.
He was in boot camp for a while.
Was he?
Yeah, I got letters from. Yeah, when they wrote to Mom.
So they said, we can't use you. So it totally devastated him. He didn't know. He came home, didn't know what to do, because he was going to be be in the Marine Corps. And he worked at some horse farms and did a few things, and then decided he was going to be a law officer, be a cop, town cop.
Yep.
So he was
18 years old.
18 years old. He was a cop in Cornish. And then he was in Plainfield
police
a while.
chief in Plainfield. Yep.
Oh, was he? In Plainfield?
Yep.
Went to Claremont, and he was police chief in Sunapee for several years.
Yeah.
And then, like Matt said, in his 40s, he kind of got the small town police thing. He said he'd get people in he liked and get them all trained, and they'd go to a bigger city for more money. So he decided he didn't want to keep doing that. So he decided to be a lawyer. He sold everything he had, borrowed all the money he could add, packed up a U-Haul, and headed for Minnesota. So he left here with basically just a high school diploma. Came back eight years later.
Was it even that much? I don't know. I don't
Came
think
back
it's
as a
that much.
lawyer, and he went to work.
So he would have gone to college then
He went
then
to
law
college, yeah.
school.
Yeah, all that after he
Yeah.
left here.
That's remarkable.
Yeah, he worked all the time. He would take jobs as security guards at night. He could study at night while he was working, because he's just sitting at a desk waiting for the bad guy to come. So, yeah, he's an incredible worker and go for days without sleeping. And
He never works an 8-hour day.
no,
Never
his
works. He
80-hour
always-
days were the short ones.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
he's
he's
slowed
a good
down a
one.
lot now, but he just started a new job. He was doing a lot with Kelly Ayotte. She was the Attorney General, and then she asked him to join her when she was senator. So he was doing law for them, and then when she didn't get reelected, he took
He
a
worked for the
job
school board, for the state school board.
5 months,
5
and then they
months?
got a job from the Secretary of State.
Well, they came to him and
Yeah,
kind of pulled him in.
Yeah,
They
they
needed
said-
him because of all this tax, the vote-in fraud and all
Yeah.
that stuff. But he's kind of the expert in the state on vote-in fraud.
so he's been there for 2
So he-
months or something. But he's slowed down. He's doing a lot more. He's-
only 60-hour weeks
Right.
instead of 80 and 100.
I'm glad we did include him. Yeah.
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 He,
He's a
um,
big part of our lives.
Yeah, he's our go-to guy if we have any questions.
Got good legal advice.
Yeah.
And from a young age, and we went to a restaurant. If somebody had to go up and ask for something, or we didn't go to a restaurant much, but just go up to the public, we'd
lost
always
and-
send him.
Yeah,
He
if
was
we're
always
lost and go to a gas station to find out where to go before GPS and all that, he would go in at 10
Yeah,
years
we
old
always-
and come back and tell us where to go.
Yeah, we always sent him.
Yeah.
He always was kind of.
Well, I think I've finished. Again, is there anything else you would like to
We
add?
could add that we're really happy that Jim's son Corey is living on the farm. So we're really, it looks like it's pretty set that we got another generation to live on the farm.
Good.
You know, I don't know
We're
what's
actually in the process of turning it over to him. I feel like in my old age, I don't need to really own anything, and he might as well own it. And I can kind of let him. If I do that before we die, we can watch and see what he does with it. And
You're not going to retire, are you?
no, I don't know what that is. I think that's
Okay.
anybody's retired aren't very happy people that don't do anything. I mean, look at you. You're busy doing this.
Okay.
You got to do something.
Yeah, and I don't know what's going to happen with this farm.
And
We'll
I've slowed
see.
down. I don't know. I'll just keep slowing down until I'm done. But retirement's not really how I look at it.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So
Well, okay. That was very enjoyable, and I learned quite a lot from the interview. Thank you very much.
thank
And as we always say at the end, okay, Billy, that's a take.